Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report. Point of order reserved by the gentleman from California.
Amendment to the amendment in
Without
the
objection,
nature.
the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentlelady from Washington is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is straight out of the Republican playbook. Find a crime in the news, make that crime a deportable offense without requiring a conviction, and then disregard the fact that the people subject to deportation already upon their conviction of the crime. The bill is inspired by the allegations of fraud in Minnesota that a conservative YouTuber claims to have discovered 4 years after the Department of Justice under President Biden began investigating these crimes back in 2022. Fraud-related crimes are already crimes involving moral turpitude, meaning that legal immigrants, including green card holders, convicted of these crimes are already deportable. There really is no need for this bill. If we're going to talk about Minnesota, let's talk about how Republicans have deployed an estimated 3,000 Department of Homeland Security agents to Minnesota. Already, immigration agents have arrested or harassed too many Minnesotans, including a 20-year-old U.S. citizen who was detained for hours and then left to walk home in the snow. Horrifically, this surge of federal agents also led to the tragic and preventable shooting of Renee Nicole Good last week. As such, I am introducing a straightforward amendment after what my colleague said last week about wanting to have a fair, independent investigation into Renee Good's death. I would hope that they would support my amendment, which will do just that. The amendment would delay the effective date of this legislation until the Hennepin County Attorney, the Minnesota Attorney General, and DHS certify that Immigration and Customs Enforcement have fully cooperated with the Minnesota state and county-led investigation into the death of Renee Nicole Good. And just in case anybody has not been watching TV across the country, didn't follow what happened last week, Renee Nicole Good, a mother of 3, including a 6-year-old child, had just dropped off her small child at school and stopped to support her neighbors when she was shot 3 times at point-blank range and killed by an ICE agent who appears to have called her a, quote, effing bitch, seconds after killing her. Initially, the Trump administration signaled that it would work jointly with local Minnesota law enforcement on an investigation, as is customary in these cases. However, the very next day, the administration rescinded that cooperation agreement. And now the Trump administration is actively refusing to share information, video, or even work with the Hennepin County Attorney and Minnesota Attorney General, leading them to launch their own separate investigation. If the Trump administration is so confident in the propaganda that they put forward about last week, they should welcome a joint investigation. They should want to work with local officials in Minnesota. But instead, the opposite is happening. The Trump administration appears to be afraid of what an independent, transparent investigation will bring to light about what actually happened to Renee Nicole Good last week. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, President Trump has not backed away from his statements, claiming falsely that the officer was recovering from his injuries in the hospital, despite video evidence that clearly shows him walking away from the shooting apparently uninjured. Secretary Noem has outrageously claimed, without any evidence whatsoever, that it was an act of domestic terror, her words. The Vice President has falsely and outrageously stated that ICE agents have, quote, absolute immunity. Not true. Given all these lies, there is no world in which we can trust the Trump administration to conduct a fair, transparent, and unbiased investigation into the death of Renee Nicole Good. Not only do they not want to investigate the officer and hold him accountable if that's what is necessary in this case, they want to conduct a character assassination of Renee Nicole Good. Mr. Chairman, we need an independent investigation into what happened in Minneapolis. This is not the first time it's happened. In only the last 4 months, immigration agents have fired on at least 9 people with lots of lies and lots of evidence that debunks their narrative. Ms. Good lived by a conviction, as her wife said, that, quote, every person, regardless of where you come from or what you look like, deserves compassion and kindness. I hope my colleagues will support this amendment for an independent investigation into Renee Nicole Good's killing. I yield back. Oh, and I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that an Axios article titled "Feds Bashed for Shocking Lockdown of Minneapolis ICE Shooting Probe" be entered into the record.
Without objection, gentlelady yields back. Does the gentleman from California insist on his point of order?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
As much as I would love to debate the gentlelady on this point, her amendment would introduce material beyond the scope and purpose of the bill before us. It therefore violates House Rule 16, Clause 7. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentlelady, the sponsor of the amendment,
Yes.
wish to be heard on the point?
Yes, I do.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment is clearly germane to the underlying legislation. This legislation under consideration empowers the Department of Homeland Security to remove individuals accused of committing fraud. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the enforcement arm of DHS, has been surged to Minneapolis to investigate fraud. A DHS spokesperson said, quote, Minnesota is ground zero for the war on fraud. This operation in Minnesota demonstrates that the Trump administration will not stand idly by as the U.S. immigration system is weaponized by those seeking to defraud the American people. That was a DHS spokesperson. Renee Nicole Good was killed by an ICE agent as a direct result of that operation. So if we're going to give DHS additional authority to deport more people for fraud without the due process requiring a conviction, then we should at least ensure that we are cooperating with local law enforcement in the investigation of a death of a U.S. citizen and mother of 3 stemming from their current fraud-related mission. So this amendment does that. It is directly connected to the underlying legislation, and I'm not sure what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are afraid of. If they want to vote against the amendment, then certainly go ahead and do that. That's your right. I would hope that that's not the case, but that certainly is your right. But to dismiss it as non-germane simply because they don't want to ensure accountability for Renee Nicole Good's death is simply wrong. So many of my colleagues on the other side last week when we were talking about this whole situation called for an independent investigation into the shooting. Well, here's your chance. Here's your chance to ensure that that happens, directly related to the underlying legislation. I ask that we have a vote on this amendment.
The gentlelady yields back. I have no problem voting against the amendment. This was close. We're just trying to follow the rules. And so the gentlewoman's amendment does not satisfy the subject matter and fundamental purposes test. House Rule 16, Clause 7, therefore is not germane and is out of order. Who seeks recognition?
I asked for a recorded. Go ahead.
We'd like to appeal